Hey, everybody. Jamie here from the Flow Genome Project, live from our world headquarters at the Flow Dojo in Austin, Texas, and wanting to welcome you all from all over the place, from Palo Alto, Minneapolis, North Carolina, Oakland, Frankfurt, Australia, Sydney. So we have Sunshine Coast, Australia. We have Sydney, Australia. We've got London. We've got folks from all over, from Denver, represent Colorado. So fantastic to see everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our live training on the neuroscience of addiction and depression. So before we get into kind of any of the details, just want to set up some road rules. So some encouragements in general about any kind of time you train with us, but then also in specific to the subject matter. And so the first is make sure that you've got a quiet, focused place without distraction, unlike me with a hyperactive little golden retriever puppy, and a place that you can write, think, and reflect. And since we're talking about addictions, I would also request that we conduct this experiment for the next hour together, which is close off all your other screens. So if you've got additional browser tabs, et cetera, knock those bad boys out, and maybe even take the crazy step of putting your phone on airplane mode. So let us just actually all be together. Let us bow in onto the mat, as it were, this virtual place for us to think, train, learn, and grow together, and then we will get cracking. So if you guys are locked and loaded, just type in ready, and we will know that we are teed up and ready to begin. So let's just kind of hear that quick verbal acknowledgement via the chat bar. And while we do that, we're going to drop in one of our first kind of polls or questions. This is going to be a fairly interactive sort of training so that you guys can get the most out of it and what's useful for you. And the first one is a great, more Placervilles, a bunch more people coming in from other places. Fantastic. You guys are all made it in. Windsor, Canada, Dayton, Ohio, San Francisco, another London. Awesome. So let's sit here. Yes, in fact, we are ready and ready to rock. And then we're going to ask you the first question, which is, how did you get here? Because we have a global community of Flow Hacker Nation, which is kind of everybody who has joined our community, read our book, Stealing Fire, taken some of our online trainings, or even come with us and train live in person in some of our fun events around the world. And there's that core community. And then there's different ways that you might have come across this. So we'd love to just get a quick sense of how did you find yourself here with us today? And we can just drop that poll that should just show up in the chat for everybody. And let's hear what you guys' response, which is just, how did you end up here? And so some of it might be from our newsletter and outreach. Some of it could have been seeing me or our co-founder, Stephen Kotler, doing a Facebook Live. You might have seen something on social. You might have just had a friend be like, hey, come check this out and see what's what. So we've got a bunch of folks checking in from our newsletter. So core crew, awesome. We've got another about 25% catching us on a Facebook Live, either Mondays in the Mind with Stephen or Freaky Fridays with me. And then a little bit, about 20% of folks coming in from just kind of seeing it, browsing your feeds. So that's all fantastic. That means everybody's welcome, but it gives us a good sense of how much kind of backup and wind up do we need to actually cover, just so that everybody is safe, sound, and oriented. So now, since we've just discussed the kind of high level sense of what are the kind of ways we train, clear your desk, turn off distractions, let's also just do a little bit that is specific. It's not that we don't talk about controversial subjects. We talk about sexuality. We talk about substances. We talk about extreme sports, which can sometimes have life or death consequences. We talk about a fair amount. And if anybody has come across our book, Stealing Fire, you can kind of validate that for yourself. But this one in particular, so we're talking about depression and addiction, it's a tender spot for a lot of us in our lives. And just want to get really clear for anybody that is coming in without already knowing us and trusting us and working with us, what we're going to cover, what we're not going to cover, and how we generally go about this. So this is not a training on how to cure, beat, or kick any of these things. This is not definitive medical advice. This is not to challenge, undermine, or anything else, anything that has ever worked for you or anyone you love in dealing with either or both of these issues. Okay, so I just want to be really clear. If you've had any success, any comfort, any recovery, any solace from anything that is out there in the available world, therapies, interventions, medications, etc., God bless, keep going. What we're going to do on this webinar is simply just introduce some additional frames, and they're consistent with who we are as a research and training organization, and also our general perspective, which is what happens if you can kind of get up on the balcony of a common social or psychological problem issue dynamic. And if you can add fresh insights, can that just give us a little bit more wiggle room? Can it just give us a little bit more choice? And can it give us a little bit more of an informed perspective to kind of live the lives that we really want to do? So if everybody's cool with that, that's the invitation. So that's kind of our effective trigger warning, which is this is take what you need from this and leave the rest. And hopefully we will create a little productive eustress, meaning we've stretched our brains but not torn our brains, and everybody comes back a little stronger. Okay. So with that said, I'm going to actually, let's see if I can do this with my handy dandy thingamajigger. Bam. I'm going to go ahead and turn on our presentation. This is very light on visuals today. We're just going to mostly be talking and kind of working through stuff together, but want to be able to share this with everybody and just kind of say, here's what's up. So road rules, we've already covered. Who we are at the Flow Genome Project, I kind of alluded to it in little bits and pieces, but we're an organization. We were founded 5 years ago by Stephen Kotler and myself, and a consortium of worldwide leading extreme athletes, special operations, military leaders, neuroscientists, performance psychologists, physical trainers, artists, and a bunch of really pretty cool folks that have been drawn around this idea of what, basically everybody who came to help support the organization had all had a shared experience in life, regardless of what industry or what their profession or vocation was. And that was, everybody knew what it was like to feel completely in the zone, feeling and performing at their best. And in fact, for most of these folks, they had actually used that feeling, used that sensation to excel in their careers and lives. And the reason we're called the Flow Genome Project is the idea that flow states, what we've just talked about, being in the zone, being at your best, and how you feel and how you perform, used to be kind of a hit or miss affair, used to be somewhat mystical or mysterious at the very least, and didn't have a lot of reproducible ways to get there. Last decade, that's been changed. We have a lot more access to measurement, to tools, to insights from the neuroscientific level, and now we can increase how much time we spend there. So that's who we are and what we do. We've written a couple of books specifically on the subject. Stephen wrote The Rise of Superman, which is all about flow and action sports. He and I just last year wrote this book, Stealing Fire, and that has been about not just flow states, but all kind of non-ordinary states, and just some stories of the amazing people around the world that have been kind of pushing that revolution and really opening it up for all of us to benefit from. So that's kind of who we are. We're a research and we're a training organization. What we're doing today is kind of a dip your toes in training. This is a chance for people that haven't had the chance to play with us to get to, and for the folks that have and are wanting more to jump in as well. Now, what this is not going to be is the kind of detailed focus and structured trainings that we do in our formal courses. But at the end of this training, we are going to share with you about Flow Fundamentals, which is our introductory on-ramp training, 6 weeks online training, which is where it all begins for anybody that likes this kind of approach, feels that they have something to gain from it, and would like to drop in on that. So that's the framework for today. Now let's just jump into the monkeys on our back, as it were, the two things that we're going to talk about, depression and addiction. And those, now let me just see, last time we did this, I learned, yes, bam, I think I've got this. I have found a slide advance button that allows me to also see you guys in the chat, which may not seem like much for you, but is game changing for me. I'm so stoked. All right, so that said, I just want to give a little bit of backstory. Because we study neuroscience and the neurochemistry of feeling and performing our best, that tends to come with what is known as a sensation or a feeling of called being autotelic. And autotelic means I do the thing, whether it's playing in my rock and roll band or skiing down a mountain or surfing on a wave or dancing at a festival. I do that thing because I'm just propelled to, I'm compelled to. And autotelic just means it has its own reason for doing or being. Well, that's a sort of fancy psychologist term. What the flip side of that term is it's addictive. And so we work deeply with all of the pleasure-producing, pain-alleviating, cognition-enhancing neurochemistry that our little brains and bodies can produce. So as a result, we play pretty close to this space. We play on the sort of sunny side of the street, as it were, on optimal and peak performance. But there is the darker side of the street. When does this stuff go wrong? And when do people in seeking pleasure actually end up in pain? So that's the kind of high level from the academic and the research side. Why might we have some kind of perspectives on this and some point of view to comment? On a personal level, the reason that I gave that Facebook Live in December, which a lot of folks responded to, which then prompted us doing this live training for everybody, which will be largely a recap. So we will be interactive. So for anybody that's learned that content, then we'll take a deep dive and we'll turn it back onto you. But as far as what we're going to talk about, spoiler alert, we're going to talk about that stuff. But I've been taking a deeper dive on it because there is someone close to me that is suffering from both of these right now. And so in my own efforts to really try and figure out what the hell is going on and really try and figure out how to help them, I took kind of a fresh cut and a recent deeper dive into the subject matter than even just kind of our normal professional awareness would have warranted. And so hopefully, the realities of all being alive and caring about people and the realities of having some folks struggle and some folks thrive is one we can all kind of share and appreciate and, sort of in service of good things for more of us. Just wanted to kind of give you guys that backstory. So let's just first check in. What is your guys, let's just do the first question, which was along the lines of what's your relationship to addiction? And do you have any experiences with, let me just see if I clicked in. And Lucas, if you can drop that bad boy, let me just see. Okay, here we go. This is our first survey, which is each of us having a relationship to some form of behaviors or habits that aren't 100% in our control 100% of the time. So if you had to kind of think it through, if you just had to pick which of the categories out of these, so phone and social media, food, sexuality, substances, or some other habit or addiction, which of those is stickiest, trickiest for you? And we're getting a kind of sliding scale here. And we've got only 10%, you're all liars about social media on your phones, by the way, you're all liars. 15%, okay, you're getting a little more honest. 20% said food, especially sweets and fats. And in Stealing Fire, we wrote about Salt, Sugar, Fat, which is a great book. If that is at all, one of the monkeys on your back, as it were, one of the things that's challenging is compulsion around food. Buy that book. It will give you real insight into this wasn't accidental. This was 100% engineered over the last 30 years by large food companies, often working together and working with big think tanks and research labs to tune what they call the bliss point. So if you are battling your food-derived bliss point, no, it's asymmetrical warfare. And it was by a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. It's really well written. So Salt, Sugar, Fat, highly recommend it. Go get it. This is not all about you and your willpower. I promise. So we got clean 25% saying food, 20% saying social media, only 12% right now saying sexuality, substances 33%, and then another 10% on kind of the balance of shopping, gambling, gaming. Okay, so that gives us some basic sense of where we are as a crew, as a group of folks checking in together today. And the first kind of headline, because we're going to debunk two prevailing myths about addiction and depression. And the first one is that addiction is a disease. Addiction is not a disease. Addiction is a neuroplastic habit gone wrong with persistent adverse consequences. Okay, so that is now we'll talk about, we'll unpack that in a moment. And if anybody has questions, quick queries, howls of indignation, by all means, chime in on the chat. And the next, just to kind of give the answer first, is that depression is not a chemical imbalance. Depression is either a symptom or a logical response to, or a rational response to irrational conditions. So addiction, not a disease, but a habit. Depression, not a neurochemical imbalance, but a symptom or a rational response. Okay, so that's headline. Now we can take some time to unpack those in some detail. So, and I will see how well, I don't know quite how well these will all work, but let me hold this up. Bam. This is The Biology of Desire. It is by a neuroscientist named Marc Lewis. Marc Lewis was actually an addict himself, nearly died. In fact, I think I just read a recent story where he was literally like high on amphetamines and uppers or something, like for a week straight. He had a friend shoot him up with heroin so that he could finally come down in some ill-advised way, and then woke up, came to, as his friends were trying to like stuff him in a dumpster, stuff his body in a dumpster, because he had had no heartbeat for like 5-10 minutes. And that was his kind of, come to Jesus moment, where he sort of turned the corner, cleared up, went back to grad school and started studying the neuroscience of addiction with a pretty rare perspective of having lived it from the inside out as a person and then getting to study it from the outside in as a scientist. And so one of the things that we classically see as far as how do we get to a model of addiction that said it's a disease? Well, for starters, it's kind of a long and wonky process, and this will be a recurring theme in many, many stories we talk about, which is the further back in the history you get, the more perspective you tend to get, and the less trusting or overly reliant you are on current interpretations of like, this is the way things are. So, for instance, another one, if anybody's interested, you can go back and read the history of the Second Amendment, and it's not until 1977 that the Second Amendment in judicial and legislative stuff, just because I just was thinking of this because of the marches this weekend, it's not until 1977 that it is definitively upheld that the individual right to bear arms was interpreted as part of the Second Amendment, not simply state militias. And yet, if you go back and forth in the current contemporary debate of that today, it is all about founding fathers and muskets on the wall versus actually understanding the history of it. So addiction is not dissimilar. There is a long and winding story about how we got to the notions of addiction as disease. One of the first is obviously AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and its methodology and its principles, which, while they've become strangely dominant in American society, are also curiously lacking rigor, research, certification, consistency, and a host of other things, but they have permeated even judicial courts. I mean, people get judicially recommended to go to AA programs, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, once again, big disclaimer, if it's worked for you, awesome. Okay, so this is not some sort of large takedown, but it is just to point out counterpoints to prevailing cultural wisdom. So there was that. That was a huge one that permeated things. And then right on its heels came the idea, in fact, really, that's it. The idea that there was a lot of blame for a condition such as addiction. And in order to counterbalance blame and shame was the movement to classifying it as a disease, which was totally noble and understandable. Because if people are really suffering and struggling, the last thing they need is to feel even worse about who they are, their morality, their ethics, et cetera, if the beast really has them, right? So that was a noble intention, which is get the blame and shame off folks. But in doing it and moving it over to addiction as a disease, it's genetic, there was both the removing of the blame and shame, but also the removing of agency or choice or responsiveness. And one of the bits of medicine or science that was often used to support that addiction was a disease was the advent of brain scans and the ability to say, look, this is a brain on drugs. And I don't mean the frying pan and eggs, this is your brain on drugs, but literally this is an fMRI. Here are the regions that have atrophy. Here are the regions that are inflamed. Therefore, that's a diseased brain. Therefore, that is why someone is experiencing this. But in fact, it was exactly backwards. And that is what Mark Lewis makes the point of as a neuroscientist. He says, in fact, brains are plastic. Brains can change over time. Brains respond, they're forever pruning synapses that aren't being used and developing and amplifying synapses and pathways that are being used, right? The classic story of the hippocampus of the London taxi cab drivers, because they were always needing to learn maps and routes and all these crazy things before phones and GPSs, and their actually spatial recognition area of the center of their brain grew and developed. That didn't mean that those folks were genetically that way all along and just born to be a cab driver. It meant that by becoming a cab driver, they had in fact shaped the shape of their brain. And the same thing with addiction. So the idea that there was this mechanical, neurological model of disease, or that there was a genetic tendency, is partial and not fully the case. Now, here's the deal. We wanted to get rid of the blame and shame. We wanted to let people heal and mend and do the things they needed to do. But in doing so, we have subtly and perniciously robbed them of agency and choice in what's going on with addiction. And what Lewis would suggest is, in fact, that addiction, as I said, are simply habits gone wrong. Right? We have created basically triggers, responses, rewards that lead us down a garden path with negative results. It isn't anything more complicated than that. And what that does is that gives us permission and choice in order to how do we respond to exactly those conditions for ourselves and for those we love. So let's just take a quick look now. Will this be available as a replay, says Fletcher? Yes, I think so. In fact, we are going to send out the replay tomorrow to everybody that registered, and especially for people that couldn't come as well. So yes to that. And Philip was just saying AA has a bunch in common with Buddhism. It does, and it can, and it's also got certain Christian undertones, overtones as well. But what's really interesting is that rather than the notion of addiction as disease being a sort of blip in the map, being around for 10, 15 years, etc., you then had the advent of an entire industry of treatment centers and clinics and everything else all built on that and baked on that. And then as a result, you now have folks that may or may not be the folks suffering. They may actually be in the business of charging those folks for solutions that may or may not work, based on the whole nature of the marketplace kind of evolving around this stuff. And if anybody's experienced any of these clinics and those kind of things, sometimes they are profound and powerful and really useful and staffed by super dedicated folks. And sometimes it's highway goddamn robbery and 10 grand a week or 40K for a month. And the recidivism rates, the efficacy rates are seriously questionable. So let's go ahead and just actually drop down the next poll. Let's see where we are here, which is to say, no, in fact, before you get that, in fact, just hold tight on answering this one for a sec. And let's actually talk about the habit. If addiction is a habit, and the goal, but it's just one that leads to adverse outcomes, stuff in our life that we'd rather not have, detriments to our health, detriments to our career, detriments to our relationships, detriments to our finances, detriments to our integrity, right? Any of those kind of things. And the question is how do we take the impulse that was getting primed, and how do we back away from that and switch it to something more positive? Because what we have learned, and certainly what we wrote about in Stealing Fire, is the idea that any technique of ecstasy, anything that we do that gives us a feeling of a peak experience, that takes us outside ourselves, is fundamentally tunable or hackable. And it's not so much that MDMA therapy for post-traumatic stress is the game changer, or that sexuality has certain positive benefits to health and well-being and vitality, or that hyperventilating and breathing can do these things, or that meditation. The really interesting thing, at least from where we sit, is the idea of saying, oh, those are all dopamine pathways. Oh, these are all boosting or modulating serotonin. Ah, this is downregulating your vagus nerve. Ah, this is creating a coherent cardiac rhythm. Fascinating. Once we know that, that's kind of like the skeleton key. And we now have different ways in order to meet that same need, in order to scratch that same itch. And so the first thing that I would request, or encourage, is to think, what is the thing I do that's quote unquote negative? I'm doing it more than I'd like. And I can tell you, mine. That's why I was so skeptical of the folks on here that were like, oh, only 24% of people said phones too much. Because on and off over this last year, I have been looking at the news way the hell too much. And it got to the point where I was mowing through, like, I'd be on Axios, and then I'd be on the New Yorker, and then I'd go over to the Economist, and then I'd see if anybody had come up with a good think piece on the Atlantic, and then I'd read Vox just for one of those big explainers, and then I'd go back to Google News, and the trouble was, right, is that, and I was just saying this to Julie, my wife, today. I was like, I could justify that. That's a pretty like responsible, mature-ish addiction, right? But I was thinking, because things are happening, and every 24 to 48 hours, like the world is absolutely like careering off in some other crazy ass direction. So I could validate it, but then I was like, is that more important? Like, unless we end up in a nuclear war, or unless there's some change in leadership in DC, it doesn't matter, to the extent that my health, my joy, my connection with the people I love, my writing and art and work in the world. Like, there's a bunch of other stuff that matters more than me staying glued to the play-by-play, right? So the question is how do we take the impulse, right? Take the impulse we experience that is negative, that's having a bad impulse, and put it into something positive. Now, we've got two options, and I'd love to just hear your guys' thoughts here, just as we check this out. You've got two options. You can either increase the friction. So Tim Ferriss, I think, said once, I always remember, if you don't want to slip, don't go where it's slippery. So what is something that you do in order to increase the friction or make it harder to succumb to the addiction that you identified? So for me, I turned off my Wi-Fi for my laptop. I'm like, I have to write my book proposal. And I turned off the Wi-Fi. This was also because of kids in the house and other stuff. I even went upstairs and went so far as to like unplug the goddamn thing. But I turned off the Wi-Fi and made it that much harder. I was like, okay. And the number, there were 2, 3, 4 times in the morning where I was ready to drift. I had some little rationale. Oh, what's in my inbox? Or, oh, what's over? Did anyone respond to me over here? Right now, it's like, no. So what have you done to increase the friction? And let's just hear that in the comments. And then let's also hear about the other one. What have you done to quote unquote lateralize? And lateralizing is just a fancy ass term for doing something different that's presumably healthier, that actually still meets the same needs. So I'm going to go back to the polls. You guys said phone addiction is a close second, says John. Okay, great. Thomas, your girlfriend would say that. Yep. Jordan says, I set a timer to work on your priorities, so you focus for 25 minutes. The good old Pomodoro, that is perfect. You let yourself indulge in the news for 5 minutes, and it's so measurable. Like, we are all just crazy. We're going to, by the way, do another live training purely on social, like cognitive liberty, and how to reclaim our minds and our lives from all the digital distractions. So we won't go crazy deep on that one today, but just know that is a subset of addictions. It's just pervasive enough that we're actually just going to carve that one out as a freestander. Okay. Chris was saying you continually expand the time, distance, effort required to get the fix. Absolutely. That's a great one. Breathing and meditation, says Philip. Sit in silence, running, exercise, slacklining. All right, Andre. Walking, art creation, shamanic ceremonies. Okay. Increase the friction by taking social media off your phone. Absolutely. An accountability buddy. Meditating. Lots of meditating. Get down, you guys. I am an alcoholic. I keep myself from, maybe that's alcoholic. If this is ginger, I keep myself from being in physical proximity of alcohol. Okay, so yeah, so if you don't want to slip, right? So that's a great one. Eat fast, eat fast, eat fast. Okay, Misha, I don't know what that then does for you. Maybe is it eat fast, get out of the kitchen, or get out of the restaurant? I'm not quite sure what's the temptation you're trying to deal with there. Rob is saying sleep, hygiene, nutrition, and activity. So you're good. Sounds like it. That's awesome. Question is why? I don't know if you're on a training about addiction and depression. Social activities, neurofeedback system. You guys are pros here, man. Oh, so wait, who's got the gaming addiction? Okay, Christopher. So I have to keep away from computers, but what I study requires me to be on my computer. So kind of a conflict. Yeah, it is super hard. The fact that our screens and our laptops are just really portals to everything these days is tricky. And in fact, I had to massively, like I would be burned out before sitting at the keyboard to try and do creative writing, and that was screwed up, because I actually needed to be able to do that. But like I had to. It's tricky. I mean, it's the convenience and the being entrapped by our conveniences. So the question here, we talked about a couple of things. One was, what is the negative, the addiction that you're facing? The next were, what are some of the quote unquote positives? So the idea of these are all just habits, and you guys identified a bunch of really cool habits. So let's just go back to that. Working out and running, so CrossFit, yoga, anything else along this line, 40% of you guys. Music or meditation, I know we kind of jam those together, but the idea of either on some form of reverie, right, default mode network kind of activation, action sports, or just kind of outdoor fun. I would include gardening, bird watching, hiking. It doesn't all need to be adrenaline based. Sex and sexuality, certainly. Ariana Huffington recently, what was she, like 6 months ago, she came out with that book about sleeping, and she said that orgasm is like nature's Ambien. So certainly there are tons of reward neurochemicals. If you think about it, it's like Blue Lagoon, right? I mean, we had to be massively incented to figure out how to get busy with each other, or none of us would be here. And you had to do that with like dumb, clueless cave people. So there's a ton of reward and pleasure neurochemistry in sexuality. Used positively can be awesome, and pretty much any of these tools can tip the balance. They can overcook if we don't watch them. And so hopefully that's something else you're noticing, which is sexuality, substances, working out. Any of these can become compulsions. Any of these can become negatives. In general, they are on the side of uplifting. And substances, saying deliberately used, healthily balanced, and integrated. So that's the other key: is, are you using it to truly reset your nervous system? Are you using it to change states of awareness? Are you using it to increase intimacy and connection? Are you using it to increase inspiration or information? If you're doing it in those ways and you're putting it on the ground back into your life, that can be a positive. This is exactly the same way that using substances to escape, to hide, to obliterate can be a negative. So we've got a couple of things here. We've got our negative, we've got the positive, and we got this idea of lateralizing. How do we, and I've shared this analogy before, but if you think back to Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? There was that initial thing where he's trying to steal the golden head from that temple down in the Amazon, and he gets the bag of sand, he kind of weighs it, and he's like, okay, I think that's about right, let me swap it. Now, of course, for India, that didn't turn out too well, right? the little thing's dropped, and the big boulder comes and chases him, and you get kind of one of the great scenes of adventure movies. But for us, the idea is like, how can I take a negative and swap it out for a positive so that my body and brain are satisfied? That when I have the itch, right, and instead of going for the donut, I go and do 20 push-ups and get a bit of a kind of body pumper high. Instead of going to the bar, maybe I go to IMAX and see a film, or maybe I go outside to a concert. So how do we switch those things? Now, just for backstory, sometimes the opposite happens. Sometimes people who have really strong go-to positive flow states, I'm thinking specifically of action sports athletes or special operations military guys, some of the folks that we work with sometimes, like obviously, if you're trained, in an elite unit and you have access to millions of dollars of equipment and you have a crazy big mission to do, and you're in that service, and that's how you get your fixes, and you're jumping out of planes and you're racing boats and you're doing all these things, and then you come out of that and you don't have the structure, you don't have the, you're just not in the service anymore, then coming back to civilian life can be really, really hard. And sometimes those guys go backwards. They go from what was a very focused and productive addiction to get their highs, right? Very much point me in the right direction. I do exactly what I'm supposed to, into being somewhat rudderless as they try and make that transition. They may end up with substance use. They may end up in fights. They may end up getting a Kawasaki Ninja street bike and going way the hell too fast down the highway at 2 a.m., right? So notice that our habits can veer. There's a subtle line between what is positive for us and what is negative for us. And it's on us to realize, if I'm carving a groove in my mind, my brain, my psyche, then it's on me to first try swapping it or try increasing the friction. Now, none of these are guarantees. If you happen to be engaged with a substance, let's say, for instance, I would say really anything that has a powerful neurochemical signature, So sexuality and orgasm, I mean, anybody who has found themselves down that rabbit hole, that's pretty powerful too. But certainly opioids, anything that has physiological withdrawal, any of those, that is an additional and more challenging category. So just want to give people full permission to both realize that swapping it, doing the bag of sand thing is going to be helpful. It puts less of a load on our system. It's the same idea of Nicorette gum. Give me the nicotine delivery. Let me get rid of the smoking mental and oral habit, right? We can do that. And at the same time, we can realize that the more positive versions of this all give us access to the same neurochemistry with less down consequence. So with that said, let me go back to chat and see what we've got here. How are you guys doing? So Phil was just saying, I've never found anything more effectual than extreme and endurance sports. Hard to negotiate that in my life. Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, that's a great one, which is the idea of the art or the passions that consume us. And in some respects, that's it's a blessing and a curse. It's beautiful to have found the things that make us come most alive. It is profound to realize that in fact, Laird Hamilton, the big wave surfer, and his wife, Gabi Reese, they are friends of ours. We train with them. We've kind of swapped training techniques and that kind of stuff. But his most recent film, Take Every Wave, came out probably like 6 months ago, and we just watched it as a family. And Gabi was saying it. She's like, yeah, when I married the guy, I knew. There was like if the swell was pumping, he was gone. Like I never tried to tame or change that part of him. And so if that's what you found, if music is a passion that's non-negotiable, if the mountains or the ocean are a passion that's non-negotiable, if there's some element of you that you have to feed your soul or parts of you die, and it more or less works, awesome. That's actually, that's kind of a blessing of self-knowledge. So when I give you, hats off on that one. Christopher was just saying, would me taking modafinil for motivation to study instead of playing games be too much of a load on your system? Don't know is the short answer. There are studies on it suggesting, big meta studies, meaning they've put together and studied a bunch of other studies, which suggest that modafinil is actually a relatively legit, relatively safe performance and cognitive enhancer, with all the caveats. Check with your doctor. Everybody's different, and radical responsibility. So, but my question there is simply, if not to motivate, like there's no such thing as like get off our ass and do hard stuff at a pill. But so check to see what's happening with your motivation and check to see if that is potentially just a brain clear. You could also check out Qualia, which is made by some friends of ours at Neurohacker Collective. It's a pretty strong kind of neurochemical stack of things. I'm not into that stuff at all. And I did some this morning and I had a very effective 4 or 5 hours of writing, which I've been flailing at for the last 3 weeks. So let's keep going. Charles was just saying, in that case, learning tops everything. I can't live without learning something new or just deeper every day. Okay, fantastic. So you guys are awesome. Speaking or performing is the highest high I've had, high or sober. I get shaky and anxious, but really excited. And when I get off, the affirmations from others feels incredible. Yeah, and I shared this, I think, maybe in my last Facebook Live, but I just saw a meme that was like, it's not odd unless there's a chance of spectacular disaster. So getting up and speaking, having that riff, hanging it all out there, that kind of stuff is awesome. That gives us, right, the risk reward, that gives us peak arousal. It does all kinds of awesome things. So with that, let's keep going and let's move on. We had a great quick insight into the negatives we've engaged, the positives we've engaged, that addiction itself is a habit, and we can address that habit if we're trying to modulate it by lateralizing to something else that is more positive or raising the bar for making it harder to slip where it's slippery. Okay, so the next one is depression. Now, we can treat them distinctly, addictions and depressions, but something that is interesting to note is that anxiety and depression typically are now, in fact, there's no new NIH studies that are coming out that are actually funding the study of depression as distinct from anxiety. They're now actually considering it a bundled condition or diagnosis. And if you think about it, that kind of makes sense. It's a little bit like, in fact, anxiety and depression is almost really a kind of detuned version of a bipolar diagnosis, manic depressive. right? Anxiety is just, I'm feeling a little too much, I'm unsettled, I'm uncertain, I'm unsafe. And of course, how long can your nervous system handle that? Not indefinitely. It's a lot of fight or flight kind of priming and triggering. And then at some point, your system is overtaxed by all of that, cortisol and norepinephrine and everything else, and you go into a depressive phase. Now, the interesting thing about depression, and I'm going to share this book as well, this is called Lost Connections. This is by Johann Hari, and if anybody has seen his TED Talk, he had a huge TED Talk, interestingly, on the other subject, on addiction, which was the opposite. Basically, his TED Talk on addiction was basically saying the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, the opposite of addiction is connection. So he has been kind of deep in this world, but he also, he was depressed for his entire adolescence, early adulthood. He grew up during the time of Prozac Nation, and he really bought hook, line, and sinker into that model of health and disease. And in this book, he makes a compelling case that, in fact, addiction is not so much a neurochemical imbalance, because once again, backstory, the idea of depression, mental health models, was a bunch of question marks. People didn't know. People studied it. They didn't know why people responded to electroshock therapy. They didn't know why some people responded to lithium or different other chemicals. It's really been kind of a dark art. And then in the sort of mid 80s or so, there was some interesting provisional research that showed that selective serotonin reuptake, meaning like the Prozacs or the Zolofts of the world, had some impact. They were very small studies. They were not wildly and rigorously validated, but Merck and Pfizer and some of the other companies that took some of these blockbuster drugs to market went with the research, and then you had multi-billion-dollar big pharmaceutical company budgets marketing it, getting it to doctors, incenting doctors to distribute it, all of those kind of things. And so once again, in the same way that the addiction is disease model permeated culture, showed up in TV, showed up in film, showed up in celebrities, all those kind of things, so too did the depression as a chemical imbalance. And once again, if you think back, how did depression used to be considered? It was highly stigmatized. It was often seen as weakness. It was seen as lack of courageousness, backbone, get up and go, whatever it would be. And so the idea of saying, hey, it's a chemical imbalance, removed the shame and the blame. But at the same time, it also fundamentally put the onus, put the burden on it's not me, it's my brain. I have a broken brain. And interestingly, SSRIs, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, have not really proven out to be effective for all people in all instances. In fact, they are wildly overprescribed and somewhat casually and even carelessly overprescribed with a lot of side effects. Now, once again, big disclaimer, for the folks, for the population for whom they work, awesome, keep using it. For everybody else that thought that was the only option, or that was even the only interpretation of your illness or condition or sadness, then here's just a little bit more wiggle room. So as we said, addiction, right, was not a disease, it's a habit. And depression is not a neurochemical imbalance, it's a symptom. Because here's what's interesting. Depression is simply an outcome. My system, my body, my brain, my heart, my mind are depressed or slowed down below normal. And that can actually come from a bunch of different things. The same way obesity isn't a disease, obesity is a symptom. There are lots of different things. You can have a tumor, you can have an endocrine imbalance, you can have a crummy diet, you can not get out, you can be completely sedentary. There's 1,000 different things that can create the symptom, the external display of obesity. And the same thing with depression. And in fact, 1 in 3 people who suffer from depression, their biomarkers for inflammation are off the charts. So I just read an article this week that was talking about inflammation, and literally your body fighting itself signals to our brains and then our minds that we actually are in a depressive state. You can put somebody into depression like that by injecting them with inflammatory chemicals and hormones. And as I said, 1 in 3 folks that test for depression definitely have those biomarkers. So you're like, okay, that's interesting. And now the other half of Johann Hari's book is like, what if not only is it a symptom, but it's actually a pretty sane symptom? What if, in fact, there's Krishnamurti had that phrase where he said, "It's no sign of health to be well adjusted to a sick society." And so, what if actually feeling depressed these days is, as much as anything, a logical response to a crazy world? And Hari picks up, I think he comes up with 8 legit reasons why someone might feel sad, why someone might have a tough time dealing. So let's actually just kind of check in with you guys. Let's drop the next questions and see what has been your relationship to depression. So let's just kind of first, before we kind of go into more detail on this, figure out why you're here. Are you here because this has been true for you in some part of your life? Are you here because you're kind of holding it down for somebody else? Could be a life partner or a spouse. It could be a kid or a parent. Like, what is your connection and relationship to depression? Because if 1 in 4 of us are on psychiatric medicines, and suicide is now the #1 killer on the planet, we all are touched by this in some way, shape, or form. So let's just see what's your relationship to it, which is, and Lucas, let's go ahead and drop that poll if we can. That would be great. I experience it on a regular basis, and you actively have sought or are seeking therapy or medication. You've experienced it occasionally, but through those dips, no matter how intense they've been, you've kind of made it out the other side on your own. Or you're holding it down for somebody else, somebody that you care about. So it's about even thirds right now, it looks like. So, all of us, a third of folks have kind of been through that valley of the shadow and really had to deal with it and really had to reach out and get help. So hat tip to you guys for the courage and the proactivity. Actually, now the numbers are going up a bit. We've got occasionally experiencing it and you're coming out the other side in your own juice, and about a quarter of us doing it for somebody we love. So the key here, most of what we're going to say now is less true for severe depression, because severe depression, the truth is that place where you've kind of gone beyond self-rescue. So severe depression means that most of the sort of interventions you could take on your own behalf are no longer in reach. You've decompensated to the point where you really do need additional help. So let's just set that category aside. But if we do set that category aside, that is that's a much smaller percentage of people that have, quote unquote, suffered from it than mild to moderate. Mild to moderate is 2/3 to 3/4 of the kind of overall category, and certainly of the category of people, on SSRIs and those kind of things. And again, just to call into question that notion of it being a neurochemical imbalance, in Europe, they have the exact opposite of SSRIs that are sort of increasing serotonin. They actually have one that decreases serotonin, and it also works. So the moral of that story, from the big picture of kind of neuroscience and psychology, our serotonin system is fascinating and complicated. And it also, for anybody that's studying this kind of stuff, it's also the system that most psychedelics, of familiar ones that Johns Hopkins and Imperial College and those guys are interacting with, like the LSDs and the psilocybins and the MDMAs, they all interact with our serotonin system in significant and highly impactful ways. And on the other hand, you've got Prozac and Zoloft. So one is like, numb me out, make me a little bit happier. Other ones are like, shoot the moon, and I'm not even on the planet anymore. All of that is from interacting with our serotonin system. So it is not to say that our serotonin system isn't vital and essential in our cognition, consciousness, awareness, and well-being. It simply is to say we just don't know what we don't know. And as we're moving into this kind of new psychedelic renaissance, the combinations with measurement devices like MRIs and all those kind of things that are happening at Hopkins and Imperial College and elsewhere, we are in a true new heyday of getting to learn this stuff again. It was just put on ice for about 40 years during the study of this stuff. Okay, so all that said, one of the things to think about are ways we can basically make the most of micro recoveries that get us enough momentum in order to then begin our macro recovery. And what I mean is active recovery is I'm taking steps to help myself get better. Passive recovery is I'm vegging on the couch and just binge watching Netflix and eating takeout pizza and crawling back into my bed, right? So I'm letting my system supposedly recover, but I'm not doing anything to like put gas in my tank. Micro recovery lives in between those two. Passive recovery, we don't really want to do so much of. It's slow, it's very inefficient, and it can often just leave us in kind of a doom loop slump. The micro recovery is a move that not many of us always think about, and that is, what is the simplest thing I can do that helps me get a little more gas in my tank, that then gives me enough gas in my tank to begin the act of self-rescue in a moment. So this would be can I go outside and just be in the sunshine? Can I just simply can I sit on a park bench doing fuck nothing but listening to my music I like? Can I just call a friend and have them come over? Can I care for a pet or an animal or take them for a walk? Can I perhaps treat myself to high quality foods, whether that's fresh juices or whether that's a home cooked meal or whether that's my favorite comfort food restaurant? Can I do the little things that can give me access to enough juice to then engage the things that we know work: movement, respiration, connection, right? All of these things. So the final thing about the notion of depression could also be a sane response to an insane world is the qualities that Hari identified, which was if our career and our vocation and our sense of self-esteem in the world is not what it could be or should be, that's a reason to be sad. If we're separated, if we're isolated from friends and family, that can be a reason to be sad. If we're disconnected from the natural world and natural beauty, that can be a reason to be sad. If we're uncertain of the future, that can be a reason to be sad. If we're overwhelmed by suffering, ours and others, that can be a reason to be sad. And then genetics, right? So we talked about, hey, it's not just a chemical imbalance, but about 1/3 of depression is genetic. And they've done studies on identical twins. So this is really interesting, by the way. I have had crazy itchy nose the last 2 times I've done live stuff. I don't know what's going on, but there you have it. So those are things for us to think about and realize, is it possible that the world as we're experiencing it has some rough patches? So let's just do I think this is our final question for you guys, which is, let us see what has been your relationship, what has been the trigger to put you there. So let's just check for you guys. What are the things that have depressed or slowed your system down? Sometimes it can literally be the tail end of a bunch of great stuff. It can be traveling and excitement and big projects you're super passionate about and go until you crash. Other times it can be literally just the slings and arrows. So illness and injury is certainly one that'll just take us by the kneecaps, but not that many of you actually. Unhealthy lifestyle, not that many of you. Career or relationship setback, that seems to be the leader right now for us as a group. And then everything, nothing, or life in general, the general existential or what the fuck. And that one, on the one hand, that's the kind of like emo college freshman sort of thing of like the world is filled with injustice and so I'm going to go down with it. And oftentimes those kids will orient around that external thing so they can wring their hands and have a nobler validation of actually how they're feeling on the inside. And on the other hand, if you're, there's that old bumper sticker, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. So getting woke, as it were, comes with a burden. Comes with the burden of knowledge. Comes with the responsibility of action, and particularly in a hyper-connected world, can be sometimes overwhelming. So with all that, and thank you guys for that. So we basically got 50% is career or relationship setback. Those are huge parts of our identity. Obviously, relationship, basically income and relationship. Income, vocation, relationship are a pretty strong kind of triad as to how we move through our society, at least. where we're not just kind of born into a role, born into a family, multiple generations. This is who you are. This is why we are. This is where we're from. But we go out and make our way in the world. And in fact, I just saw something in the Atlantic that was saying marriage is now getting delayed longer than ever, and it's now considered a crowning achievement. Marriage is now effectively being practiced as a status acknowledgement, which I thought was fascinating. Not this is how we start our life, but more like this is the crowning glory. Maybe even after having kids, maybe even after living together for a while, all kinds of things. So very, very interesting kind of change on that. And when those things get rocked, we can really be at loose ends as to who we are and why we are. So that's a bunch of stuff. Now I'm going to ask the actual real questions. So all of this was warm up. And the real questions are going to be 3 points. So the first is I want you to think about what you identified as your leading addiction, the most detrimental one. And I want you to think about your relationship to basically emotional sadness or depression, your low points. And this is a set of questions that we basically ask everybody to go through on every one of our live trainings in some shape or form, which is basically what has your current and past relationship to addiction and depression cost you in your life. And so this is an invitation for a kind of fearless inventory, and this is where you will get the juice out of, but hopefully any value out of this training together. So ask yourself, think back, what is my relationship to that addictive habit? What is my relationship to my depression, if in fact you've had some, or some shape or form, as I imagine most of us have? And what does it cost you in your life? And let's go ahead and just fire in, it doesn't need to be more than 1 to 3 sentences, but just kind of be short and sweet and contextualizing that and bringing that to life. And let's just see what we've got here. John said years. Adam was saying everything. Raphael saying broken brain from excess sugar, caffeine, and refined cup. That'll do it, man. Good God. Yeah. Sugar, that sounds like coffee and donuts. Jill, relationships, confidence, achievements, education, jobs. The teaching that comes from losing everything to addiction and depression makes gaining everything for the sake of others. Cost and energy in getting things done. Joy, pleasure, connection. Boss likes to hassle you, which gives you stress, which you relieve by hitting the snack machine. Okay. C, career expansion, self-loathing, social isolation, work, relationship, dreams, cost the ability to build momentum to achieve your destiny. Almost lost your life, Anita. Wow, that's big. It's caused you a career you didn't want and pushed you to massive changes you need. It's kind of made me. Cost of losing years of aliveness. Injury and prescription pain medication cost you your triplets for 5 years. That's a huge one. Delays in entrepreneurial ambition, increased debt, opportunity to live in your thoughts. Okay. Peace and self-love, 22 years of relationship. Almost cost you your life. No, you can get good stuff done. All right. So that's a fearless inventory, guys. That's balls out. Thank you. So the next question is just get super clear. How much longer are you willing or able to tolerate that condition, that status quo? And again, and every time I ask that question, I contextualize it. There isn't a right answer to this. There's an honest answer. And so the honest answer is literally, how much longer are you willing to accept that? And it could be not another moment. It could be, well, I've been kicking the tires on this one for about 10 years and nothing's changed, so probably another 10. It could be a clear milestone. When I've saved this up, when I've paid that off, when we've moved them out, when I've quit this, when I've done that. There's a lot of times we make calculated decisions and trade-offs. We don't get everything we want all at once. So what is your realistic timeline on how much longer you're able to have this ongoing relationship with addiction and depression and those accrued consequences? So Norm is saying no longer. Ginger, I can't accept it. You've been sober since 2018, so that's recent. Wait, December the 20th, 2018, we're not there yet. Are you time traveling? That doesn't sound very sober. Leanne says, I don't know. I just feel stuck. Okay, not tolerating it, fighting it like crazy. Adam, 0 tolerance. Frank, about another 3 months. Okay, working hard against your psychiatrist to wean yourself of SSRIs. Okay, and just do your research, learn your stuff for sure. That can be a jaggedy ass road coming off those things for sure. No toleration accepted now. Phil, it's balance. Alcohol is what almost killed me, but my relationships have helped me go. It's gone. Started SSRIs in 2017. Okay, great. So hold that. That's like, if you guys leave with anything out of our time together, leave with, like, even just write it down. Write it down in a notepad. Write it down on a piece of paper you had with you. This is my addiction. This is my relationship to depression. This is what it's cost me, and this is how much longer I'm willing to put up with it. Okay, so be super, super clear on that. There aren't right answers. There's just more or less true ones. So get really, really clear on that. Okay, so now we're going to shift, and I want to thank you guys all for that. And I want to just share with you a little bit about what a solution. It's not the solution, but it is the solution that we have put together to help people with this. And you can stay if this is relevant and you're interested, or you can bounce. So we've concluded the kind of diagnostic and interactive part. I'm going to take 3 to 5 minutes, not much more than that, and just say, hey, if you're interested and you like this kind of approach and you've enjoyed participating in this, you may want to check this out. So what we are starting with is the fact that all of these things, our relationship to forming our habits and our relationship to our moods and our states, is in fact hackable these days. And it's not that mysterious. And what we would like to call it is, instead of external pharmacology, we will call it like psychopharmacology. Meaning that if we understand the neurochemicals in our brains and our bodies, and we understand how to tune them, shape them, prime them, turn them up, turn them down, then we are less dependent on pills from a bottle. And or drugs in a baggie, right? So both the addiction and the depression idea. We can take responsibility for occupying our minds. And that is kind of a cool and relatively new development. And so the way we can do this, I'm not going to bother you guys with this too much, but this is the sort of the dashboard we steer from when we are looking at any interventions and ways to improve our lives, improve our focus, concentration, and performance. Now, the key here is that the right-hand side is where things get fun and interesting. This is where peak experiences come from. The left-hand side is kind of where our everyday normals hang out. And learning this kind of map, learning what's possible, gives us back a ton of power. It removes us from the blame and shame, but it also gives us back our agency that thinking about addiction and depression as diseases or as chemical imbalances has robbed us of. So we get to take back our own choices and decision-making about how our experience is. And we get to, instead of just talking about how we feel, we actually get to shift how we feel in real time. Okay? So what that is fundamentally our flow fundamentals. And now somebody told me that I use the word fundamental or fundamentally in my sentences, especially just in discussing stuff. And now I cannot not hear it. So yes, flow fundamentals is our beginning program to get outreach to people and to let people start training in this journey. And what that means is, like, we do work with top organizations, so sort of Fortune 100 companies, varying branches of the military, varying professional elite athletes. That stuff is not open to the public. That stuff is typically very intensive, very high dollar, and not accessible. So what we have done with Flow Fundamentals is create a program that is available for everybody. And what that allows us to do is because our mission is, yes, we love and we're deeply honored to work with the best of the best. But part of our mission as an organization is to actually create a crowdsourced global movement of flow hackers, of people that are living their best lives, that are doing cool and badass shit in the world, and that are using these tools and trainings to help support that. So this is mission driven on our part, and this is our outreach into basically everyone. And that's people who are teachers, people who are nurses and doctors, people who are coaches and trainers, people who are creatives and coders, that everybody should have access to this stuff. So we are not about a bunch of fancy pants ideas and missing stuff. We are about practice-based experiments. You are your own human being. You are your own test subject. What we do in this course is give you guys the tools, the introductions, the instructions, and the prompts, and then the feedback and the coaching in order to be able to make the most out of your own life. So, for instance, if we go back to the theme of this training, which was addictions and depression, if you're curious about how to make the most of these, then paying attention to sleep and sleep hygiene, paying attention to daily movement patterns, paying attention to breathing and heart rate variability, paying attention to getting outside in nature, deliberately seeking more novelty or challenge or risk. These are the kind of ways that we get to actually take this out of the black box, out of just passively wondering if things are going to change, and take our lives back in fun and engaging directions. And the other thing, again, is community. So one of the biggest things that happens when you take Flow Fundamentals with us is you get plugged in with a cohort. We only do a group at the beginning of every month. The next one is coming up next week, the beginning of April. So that's why we're here today at this time of the month to say, hey guys, if you're stoked, jump on the bus. And the invitation is to be, just as we've been encouraging each other and people have been commenting in the chats here, conducting our experiments, reporting back, sharing the triumphs, sharing the disasters, meeting like-minded folks, and really feeling supported by something that's pretty awesome and impressive. And to share this, I'm just gonna actually, this is pretty cool because this is, what is this? This is like $350 for just of a DNA test and your own heart rate variability monitor. So this lets you tune your body and brain. The DNA test is super relevant for tonight because it's a 16-strand test on what is your relationship to all the neurochemicals we've just been talking about. So serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine, endorphins, your likelihood for preponderance for alcohol use, your likelihood for cannabis addiction, your likelihood for binging and overeating, your likelihood for neuroticism, a whole host of things that on the downsides could actually impact you and leave you in one of those states we've been discussing tonight, or on the upsides can leave you better able to get in the zone and access your highest and best self. We give you guys that actual genetic insight, and then you actually unpack your biographical insights and your lived history. So it's a pretty cool package of self-knowledge that would normally take 5 to 10 years of blabbing to the therapist, if ever, and you guys get to conduct that experiment yourself. So that's really the sort of big picture description of what we're doing, what it's about. This is, as I said, this is the on-ramp that is accessible to everybody. And our intention is this is how we invite people to join our worldwide community of people learning to hack flow, learning to take responsibility for their life, and learning to make the most of basically neuroscience into lives well lived. So that's it, guys. I want to leave you guys with, oh, actually, check that out. And it fucking works. How's that? We do a pre-post study on the largest academic assessment of getting into the zone, people boosting motivation, decreasing self-criticism, increasing being absorbed in the moment, and the results are substantial. And so for a 6-week program that was delivered via a phone for about an hour a day, that's pretty damn good ROI. So if you think back to when you said, hey, what's my relationship to addiction and depression costing me? And you think, hey, could I get 100% boost in my juice? Could I get an 85% increase in my motivation? What would I do with that? That's the decision. That's the decision you should weigh and say, hey, is this my exact, is this my jam? Is this my tribe? Is this something I'm fired up to do? So this here is your invitation and challenge, which is, what are you going to do now? Right? What are you going to do now? We learned some good stuff together, and thank you guys for all your heartfelt comments. Thank you for your open and fearless inquiries. And the real question is it number one? You're like, okay, cool. I'm going to bounce now. I'm going to go watch something on Netflix, and you kind of like forget about this by morning. Are you going to be like, okay, wow, no more. I'm not going to do this anymore. And you kind of rally and you're stoked for 3 days and then it kind of peters off. Or are you going to say, okay, today's the day. Today's the day I take a step. Today's the day I join hands with brothers and sisters and I actually get this done. So that's the invitation. And take the step that makes the most sense for you. We are here. This is what we do, and this is your call to adventure. If now isn't the time, take a step regardless. You can check out Reading, Stealing, Fire if you're interested. There's 15,000 words of endnotes at the back that you can follow at your local public library and go down a lifelong rabbit hole. You can reach out and just do something for yourself that makes sense. Call a friend, get outside, move your body, right? Write some things down. That's another great way to anchor your learning. But whatever it is, whether it's coming and training with us, and this is a heartfelt invitation to do so, it is the beginning of a long-ass fun journey. It only gets cooler when we're together and in person, doing adventures, being down in the canyons, being up in mountains, being at the ocean, varying other playgrounds and everything else we do. But at the very least, take a commitment to do the one thing that you're going to do next to change the direction of where you are. So let's end with that. What is the one thing you could be? Check out the landing page. Feel free. I think it's actually probably up, isn't it? I don't even know how to run my very own. Here we go. Let's just see. Yeah. Check out the course. You can click on that button and just learn more. It's entirely, think it through yourself. That could be a step you take, or name the other one. So what is it going to be? It can be, checked out the landing page or checked out the course, or something else you're going to do. So let's just end with that. Let's just actually type in the one thing you're going to do, let's say in the next 6 hours. And it doesn't, obviously, if you have a plan for tomorrow, you want to go for a hike or something, text your friend, arrange it, do something tonight before the sun sets that's actually going to make a difference for you in your life, and a positive relationship to increasing healthy, productive habits versus destructive addictions, and in improving your relationship to your mood, whether that's changing one of the external things that's actually leaving you depressed, or taking a step on the inside to realize, hey, this is a symptom, and I'm going to go back and start excavating for the cause. Okay? Jamie saying 3.0, Flow 3.0, awesome. Christopher, stoked to see that, man. Ginger, feel free. We always look to support people. If there's a sincere request and a legitimate one for financial aid, we always ask people to be giving back to the community in ways, whether that's writing papers, whether that's putting together something that can be shared with folks less fortunate. We've had folks who are educators come and work with us, and then create manuals so that other teachers and other classes can learn stuff. So our goal is to open source this content by 2020. So we are always interested in supporting sincere people, but we only return serve as hard as you hit it at us. So the more energy and focus you're putting on your inbounds to us, the more we honor that on the return. We do not find that simply giving people free tickets to Willy Wonka land increases their likelihood of success. There needs to be good commitment and skin in the game. Red Stealing Fire, says Lauren. Yep, absolutely. Psychology and Jordan Peterson's book. Yeah, I'm writing my book proposal, and I'm referencing Jordan Peterson's book because it's close. I'm actually going to be talking about Church 2.0, so like how to do a post-conventional, post-doctrinal, social, cultural movement based on the very things we're talking about. So I was literally just writing about Jordan Peterson. But I must say, man, his funny little stories about lobsters and skateboarding kids then devolve into some incredibly dense shit that I'm into it. So I'm totally down to read it. But how that became a #1 bestseller, I think points to how hungry people are for meaning these days, and B, what just a huge gap there is in the marketplace of like anything from I'm either like dyed in the wool, old school, faith-based, or I'm just kind of out here in secular humanist land with no meaning whatsoever. So yeah, Jordan Peterson doing some great stuff. Andrew's still struggling through 2.0. Don't struggle through 2.0. Come and join 3.0. It's way better. So it's way more fun, much higher production value, fully studio shot everything, cooler. We basically took every bit of advice and feedback we got on 1.0 and 2.0, and now our third version is the charm, and it kills. So just reach out to Lucas, Andrew, and make sure that you get immediate access to get transported over and join the next 3.0 class. Cool. So with that, Ginger, you're saying you're awesome. Thank you. Thank you guys. This is fantastic. Super stoked. Janet saying already registered, waiting for your kids to advise. That is awesome. So once again, guys, if you remember only a couple of things, it's that let's see, it's that addiction is a habit with negative consequences, not a disease without a cure. And that depression is less a neurochemical imbalance than it is a symptom of either other root issues or a totally logical response to an insane world. And so what I would propose about all of this flow stuff, and I will leave you guys with this, which is that learning to feel our best and perform our best, learning to have these peak states, learning to experience ecstasis is not a get out of jail free card. And we actually end Stealing Fire with that because it's so important, right? Life's a bitch, and then we do in fact die. None of us get out of here alive. And so the idea of like, well, why does it matter? Why would we bother? The simplest answer is just so that when it comes time to go back and do the hard things we have to do, there is just a little bit of lightness in our heart. There is just a little bit of spring in our step. And there is just a little bit more clarity that we know, in fact, that where we're going actually leads to the mountaintop. So with that, guys, that's our offer. That's our invitation. That is our loving challenge. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have fun, be well, and we will see you on the other side.